God stoops down to meet with his people. We see it over and again throughout the Bible. God stoops down to form the very first man, Adam, out of the ground. God comes all the way down to meet with Abraham, to eat a meal with him and share with him a promise. God also encourages Jacob later on in the Bible when he's facing angst and trouble. God comes down and gives him a new name. Over and again in the Bible, we see God stooping to be with his people. And so it should really be no surprise when Jesus stoops the night before he's betrayed. I love the way that Sally Lloyd-Jones in the book, the Jesus Storybook Bible, illustrates this whole scene. She imagines an argument going on between the disciples in which they're talking about stinky feet. You see, in those days, as you walked through the streets of a city like Jerusalem, your feet would pick up all the filth and grime that accumulated on the streets that doubled as the sewers. And the job of the lowest servant, the most humiliating job of all, was to wash the feet of the dinner guests who came. Sally imagines the disciples arguing against one another about who should have to wash the feet and creatively finding ways to dodge the responsibility. And Jesus quietly gets up from the table, wraps a towel around his waist, and begins to wash the disciples' feet. Can't you imagine that every bit of bickering falls away to stunned silence? Jesus stoops to be with his people. It's not very surprising if you know the whole history, for it was Jesus himself who had come to Jacob and encouraged him. It was Jesus himself who had eaten with Abraham, as Jesus would be eating a meal with his disciples in just a few minutes. It was Jesus himself who was there, who formed the feet of the very first man, Adam. Feet that were now seen in the descendants of Adam that Jesus himself washed. Jesus wasn't afraid to lower himself, to be humbled, to serve others. That's what Philippians 2 tells us, that Jesus was willing to humble himself to the point of death, even death on a cross. Jesus was willing to suffer humiliation, for crucifixion was nothing less than that, being stripped and beaten, mocked, and publicly executed so everyone could see how terrible of a person you were. Of course, Jesus certainly didn't deserve any of it. Jesus was the only perfect person ever. Jesus had come to the cross with an entirely different purpose in mind. Washing. Not just washing feet, but washing lives. Washing away the sin and filth that clings on to his children, so that they could be clean, so that we could have life. It's the reason why Jesus came all the way down, stooping to serve. Jesus is washing the disciples' feet as they're there in stunned silence when Peter breaks it and says, "Lord, this isn't right." Jesus shakes his head, tells Peter, "No, this is right. Because just as I have done to you, you also are to do for one another." Tonight we celebrate Maundy Thursday, as it's called in the Christian church. Maundy comes from the Latin word mandante, which means commandment. It's a celebration. a remembrance of the last night Jesus spent with his disciples in that upper room when he gave them the command to love one another as he had loved them. Jesus' love is perfect. Perfect self-sacrifice, perfect willingness to lower oneself to serve others. And so also, as we follow Jesus, we love. We follow his command to love one another. And that love might look a little differently than washing feet. It might look like sharing a meal. In a long line that stretches all the way back to the meal God shared with Abraham and the meal Jesus shared with his disciples, so too Jesus' followers today share meals with one another. Maybe it's as simple as dropping a meal off to someone's house, something for someone who's in need or someone who might be lonely, something extra that we have to share. Love might take the form of an encouraging voice, a voice that stretches all the way back in history to God encouraging Jacob, to the words that Jesus himself spoke to the disciples on this very night, all the way to us today. A voice that's perhaps heard in a phone call for someone who's by themselves during the quarantine. A phone call, a text, a message to say, I'm thinking about you, I'm praying for you. Love might take the form of hands that serve. It might not necessarily be washing someone's feet. Instead, it might look like packaging care packages for someone who's in need. It might even be as simple as folding one's hands in prayer, serving by lifting up those who are in need in the world. Jesus isn't afraid to serve others. That's why he came. He's the God who stoops. He loved us, and he loves us. And so we love one another. I want to encourage you tonight to do an exercise that might seem a little strange. In the world in which we live right now, strange has become kind of the normal, hasn't it? I'd like you to actually take time to wash the feet of the people with you. To take time to get a bucket and a towel or take the whole family into the bathroom, whatever that might look like, and literally wash one another's feet. And while you're doing that, I'd like you to consider and talk about this question. What are some ways that we can show love to one another, especially during the quarantine? What are some ways that we can love one another just as Jesus loved us? Would you pray with me? Father, thank you. Thank you for sending your Son, Jesus, to love us perfectly, for being willing to stoop, to come all the way down to us and meet us right where we are. Father, whether it was through a meal or through encouraging words or through the laying on of your hands, you were never far away from your people. So also, as we love one another, may we reflect the love that you've shown to us so perfectly through your Son, Jesus. Prepare our hearts this week for walking with him in the week that changed everything, going to the cross where he gave up his life for us, and going to the empty tomb which we celebrate on Sunday. We pray all this in the name of your precious Son, our Savior Jesus. Amen.